the best of Money Matters. The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jung. Now, the PAP celebrated a resounding victory at the 2025 general election held on the 3rd of May, where we saw a landslide victory in their favor, winning 87 out of 97 seats. However, how did this happen when just a mere few days ago we saw a lot of noise online which put the opposition parties as the favourable candidate to be elected into Parliament? Now that the dust has settled, we're all left with one question. Did social media overhype expectations for change in GE2025? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they are here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. On that note, if you'd like to send some questions in for our guests, feel free to WhatsApp us at 88550893 or leave a comment if you have any questions on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube comment section, as we're currently streaming live on there as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest for tonight. Joining us today is Terence Chia, who is a co-host of Yalla But podcast, that will share with us how social media did not overhype the expectations for change in GE 2025. And on the other hand, we have Daniel Lim, co-host of the Daily Catch-Up podcast, to help us understand otherwise. Welcome to the Hot Seat, both.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
All right, so let's just start off with one question here for both of you. How do you think different political parties leverage social media in this year's election? Maybe, Daniel, we can start off with you.
Well, I think there were two broad categories. I think there was earned media, so basically coverage from either mainstream media or new media players on the social media space, and then there was own media as well. I think on the earned media side of things, I thought in particular PAP, WP, and SDP did very well in terms of optimizing their rallies and their doorstop interviews for sound bites. And I think in today's age where you have TikTok and Reels, it's a platform that is so optimized for a soundbite, and I think they picked the perfect zingers to put out during rallies so that you'll get clipped and you'll get shown. I think when we look at the own media space, so platforms that they either run on their own or is published on their own direction, I thought the proactive stuff was quite interesting. I think PAP had some introduction videos that were quite good. I think it was quite well paced. I thought WP had a very interesting strategy, which was to do micro documentaries, like a day in the life style videos for some of their candidates, and that did well. But the one that really caught my attention was the reactive stuff. So I think WP had this mini hashtag not white thing, which I thought was pretty good. I think it was after their first rally where it was really muddy. People had muddy shoes, and they were putting hashtag not white, and I think that went semi-viral. And then I thought PAP did quite well with the DPM gun stuff. So I think when there was a video that went out about him being like shunned away, or maybe didn't get a handshake, and I think they within a day had a video of him meeting a lot of people. There was a queue to meet him. So I thought the reactive stuff was quite fun.
Okay, Terence, what about you? What are your views?
Yeah, I agree a lot with him that they leveraged social media really well in different ways. And in terms of reactive stuff, I mean, everyone remembers Task Force Man.
Yes.
That was such a big meme, right? And that they really turned around something that seemed so negative about this guy who was like you say, trying to attract people's attention on the streets. Or that they really turned it around and made it into a thing that I think even Straits Times itself made the meme of Task Force Man as Batman. So on both sides, whether it was Workers' Party working for Together, the hashtags they were using, I felt like they were really on point in terms of reacting to the things that were happening on the ground there.
Okay. Well, leading up to GE 2025, online sentiments, seem to swing towards the opposition, with people voicing out issues surrounding rising costs of living, housing, and many others. Now, according to the New York Times, their headline for an article surrounding Singapore's general elections prior to the results was, "In Singapore's election, all eyes are on the margin of victory, not the winners." So, Terence, do you think social media created, an unrealistic expectation of change, ultimately distorting voters' sense of what was actually achievable and creating a sense of disconnect between online narratives and actual voter behavior?
I think there's a little bit of nuance when looking at the results. Obviously, the popular vote share. Everyone's looking at that and the total number of seats everyone won. And people are saying it was status quo. But if you really look at the numbers and look at, for example, look at Workers' Party, all the places that are contesting, they either maintained or improved their popular vote share in those places, right? Compared to, the smaller opposition parties who, a lot of them, lost their deposits. And one more interesting factoid is how the independents actually did pretty well as well in this election, surprisingly. So there's actually a bit of nuance in looking at these results. And when we talk about expectations, right? Like what expectations are we talking about? So for me, the fact that there were these different undercurrents, even in the opposition voter numbers, it kind of showed that, hey, was it really that far from what people were saying online? Workers' Party did very well, even against a general nationwide swing for the PAP. And, independents also, did very well in spite of there never being, such successful independent candidates before. So I think it's difficult to just say that social media, generally just changed everyone's expectations that much.
Okay. Well, then, Daniel, is it fair to say that social media simply reflected the public's genuine frustrations and hopes leading up to GE 2025 rather than artificially inflating them?
What I would say is that I think the frustrations were real. I think the calls for change were real. I think the problem with social media, or even when we've seen in 2015 as well with large rally turnouts, sometimes the people who are angry or maybe frustrated with status quo tend to be the louder voices, and the people who are maybe content or even happy tend to be the silent ones. And so that can distort our representation of how many people are actually feeling a certain way. And I think this is conflated even more when algorithms are at play. I think people are now becoming more aware of how social media platforms and their algorithms are basically allowing us to see more of the types of content that we agree with already. And that can further skew our idea or the representation of how many people actually agree with that point of view. So, for example, we don't actually know the number of people who maybe are calling for change. All we do have is that national vote share. But if, for example, 35 to 40% of people were calling for change and maybe wanted something different, social media can make it sound as though there's a consensus because that's all you're seeing. And one thing that was quite clear to me just anecdotally was that I personally was seeing a little bit of both on my social media feed. I was seeing support for the incumbent, I was seeing support for the opposition, and it was fairly represented, I think, to some extent. But I had colleagues who were very surprised by the results, and when I asked them about what they were seeing on social media throughout campaign period, they actually didn't see any support for the incumbent. And so they were especially, I guess, surprised, maybe not necessarily frustrated, but surprised just because it didn't, social media didn't quite represent what was happening on the ground.
So you kind of revealed your algorithm there for
a little bit, but my algorithm is filled with maybe colleagues, with industry friends, more than just social friends. So hopefully that's enough of a disclaimer.
All right. Well, looking back at the past GE 2025 campaigning period, we also saw candidates collaborating with multiple influencers. For example, Mr. Edwin Tong did a video with local actor Maxi Lim, where they did a skit with the former, showing the latter the ropes on, conducting a Meet the People session. Opposition candidates also appeared on social media videos as well with influencers, such as Dr. Chi Soon John's Protashop date with content creator Pretty Please. Now, despite candidates gaining significant traction on the platforms where these content were posted, only the opposition kind of failed to convert online popularity into electoral success. So, Terrence, while influencers have, broad reach, is it possible that their influence over voters have been more about creating, a so-called trend rather than fostering informed political decision?
I think influencers and, social media creators have a place alongside the mainstream media journalists as well. When we think about the decisions that politicians make or, key political office holders make, we know about the content of the decisions. And a lot of times in the news, we read about the content of the decisions and why they made the decision. But we don't know about the context of why they made that decision. So what I think these influencers and the social media creators do is they allow you to understand the person behind the decision as well, and the context in which they came from. So, for example, when, on our podcast, when we spoke to Ong Yi Kang, we delved a lot into his history, like why he thinks a certain way, and even down to his relationship with his parents. And that actually informs maybe how he thinks about policy and things regarding Singapore's future. So I feel like they actually work in concert rather than, one's good, one is bad. So I don't think of it in that dichotomy where influencers don't have a role to play in forming political discourse.
Okay. Well, between the both of you here, you guys have hosted multiple political candidates on the Yalla Butt and Daily Ketchup podcast, respectively. Terrence, you hosted PM Lawrence Wong on Yalla Butt podcast, and that is his only podcast appearance during the GE2025 campaigning period. Is there any particular reason why?
I'll be totally honest. In the lead up to the elections and everything, everything was a mad rush, right? So we were trying to schedule something with him, but we were not aware that it would end up being the sole campaign interview that he did. We're proud that it happened, but we were also not planning for that. And I assume it's because he has also done his rounds on other mainstream podcasts and the big ones like Daily Catch Up and Plan B. Maybe, if anything, he was just closing the loop and finishing on with Yalla Butt. So I wouldn't say that there was anything special that made it happen.
Okay, if you say so. Anyways, Daniel, but could it be that social media kind of exposed candidates to greater scrutiny, which makes them more visible online, thus having this misconception between virality and popularity?
Well, yeah, I think social media can be a double-edged sword, but I think if I was a candidate, I would rather have that social media exposure than to be an unknown. What I would say is that I think with social media, you get to overcome quite a lot of maybe awareness or visibility issues, especially if you're a new candidate or if you're independent. You have to make up for a lot of time that you didn't have, right? So I think like with Jeremy Tan or even with Daryl, like the two independents, I thought that they leveraged on social media really well to make up a lost ground. But I think while social media is great in terms of helping you with your visibility game, it cannot substitute things that voters do care about, which I think is your groundwork, right? The ground game. I think if we look at the battlegrounds like Bukit Panjang SMC, we look at Punggol and we look at Tampines, I think it's fair to say that the losing candidate was pretty well exposed on social media, whether it was earned or owned media. And I think, like, you look at Dr. Paul Tambaya, for example, someone who's really well, like, personally, I like him a lot as well. And I think a lot of people expected him to either do better or even get into parliament, and he actually lost vote share. And when people were surprised online about why that happened, residents or people who say that they were residents of Bukit Panjang actually went online and explained that actually while Dr. Paul was visible on the ground, his opponent and the winning candidate, Liang Enghua, was a lot more visible.
Okay.
I think someone said online just today actually on Reddit that Dr. Paul was on the ground 1 to 2 times a week for the last 5 years. Liang Enghua was there 3 to 4 times a week. We don't know how true is that, but I guess that just goes to show how much groundwork is really, I guess, like put forward rather than everything else. And I think other things that was also acknowledged in Bukit Panjang was like the $1 deals. And I think we saw that in Punggol and Tampines as well. People talk about DPM Gun in Punggol, but residents of Punggol will actually point towards Sun Choi Ling as like the hard carry, so to speak, someone who's actually worked the ground really well there. And if we look at Tampines as well, I think people would say Bayam King is someone who's really worked the ground really well. So social media can help with a lot of areas like lack of awareness, but it cannot substitute good groundwork.
Well, speaking of online presence here, we saw that the PAP were very active on all social media platforms. This includes Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, depending on where your algorithm stands, right? An interesting point to note here is that out of all the political parties contesting in GE 2025, the PAP was the only party that pushed social media content out on a daily basis. One such candidate was Mr. Ong Ye-kung, who also mentioned in his thank you speech after the results were announced that social media helped him a lot. So, Daniel, going back to you here, how do you explain the fact that their extensive social media presence didn't lead to an anticipated, shift in voter sentiment, especially when Mr. Ong himself acknowledged the significant role social media played in his success?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that I think if you look at the voter basis, and this is just from speaking to several political analysts and experts, I don't know how grounded these numbers are, but I think it's safe to say that there are maybe hardcore or safe PAP votes that are about maybe 30 to 40% of the population, and then there are those that maybe are 20-30% of the population that are opposition, and then the rest are kind of swing voters. And if you look at swing voters and what their social media consumption is going to be, I think they tend to consume a lot more of the opposition content just because they want to know what it's like, what's the messaging there, and maybe not so much of PAP content content just because you kind of know what you're going to get. You've already probably lived in a PAP ward, or, it's been the governing ruling party for all this while. So I think just because there is daily content doesn't necessarily translate to more views or more interactions. So I think that's something that maybe is a little bit incongruent with the expectations on the ground. The second thing is that I think with someone like Mr. Ong Yi Kang, I think he does very well on social media. Outside of the campaigning period, I think he gets one of the highest interactions in terms of views, in terms of likes, and in terms of comments as well, that I think many brands who are envious of the numbers he gets. In fact, anecdotally, when we had him on for a live stream during the campaign period, some of my colleagues who are maybe slightly opposition leaning were even excited to see him. So that's how popular he is. So I think just because he was doing good numbers during campaign, it wasn't out of the ordinary, and so that didn't necessarily mean that there was going to be a swing towards the PAP.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Terence, would you say the other political parties lacked their social media engagement as compared to the PAP?
I would say that there's a difference in resources as well. When we were on the ground in Punggol, and because what we did as a podcast, we actually went to a different constituency every day to record a podcast in these places. So, for example, when we went to Punggol, while crossing the bridge to go over to maybe see where Mr. Gan Kim Yong was speaking to people, we were accosted with people handing out flyers for the PAP. When we got to where Mr. Gan was hanging out, there was a team around him, and, they would manage his media appearances and everything. As compared to, when we went to Aljunied and saw how the Workers' Party was doing, yes, there was a group of volunteers, but it was still sizably, in terms of size, it was still smaller than that of the PAPs. So there could be an issue of resource in terms of the opposition parties having less resources in terms of how they use social media to engage with people. But also, I think the nuance also is when you look at how Workers' Party, for example, was pitching on social media, it seemed to be at a slightly, the production value seemed to be higher.
Okay.
Like they were trying to maintain a certain level of production value to almost make it feel like they're speaking to you in a more elevated manner, right? Whereas I think PAP, I think it was meant to really reach out more to the masses. And so they were actually going for different kind of audience demographics as well. So I think that actually may have contributed to perceiving their social media outreach differently. But actually, for a certain demographic, I think WP's message worked really well. And for PAP's social media messaging, it worked really well for another demographic.
Some great insights from you both here so far. Just coming back here, we have a comment from one of our listeners from End 5. Now, this person's asking, was there a greater focus on GE social media towards people consuming English social media, especially podcasts, versus other languages? If yes, is there some untapped potential here? Daniel, maybe we could go off with you first.
I would think, well, it depends whether you're a political candidate and party versus a content creator. I think if you're a candidate or party, you kind of want to make the most bang for your buck because I think every minute counts and your most limited resource at that point of time is time. So if you're going to create content, you would feel like you want to speak to as many people as possible, and I feel like that's why maybe there was an over focus on English content. But for us, because Daily Catch Up is part of Gravity Media, we actually also have a Chinese talk show called Are You OK? And we did have the opportunity to speak to a couple of candidates, and we saw a large number of views there as well, maybe because of the lack of maybe non-English content. So I definitely do think that there is an untapped potential, but I can understand why as well.
Terence?
Yeah, definitely there is untapped potential because I don't know if you remember one of the moments that was stuck in people's minds was Bernadette Giam, a PAP Chinese candidate, speaking Tamil, right? So I think all the people speaking vernacular languages actually attracted attention. And I think there were even comments about the Chinese roundtable discussion where people were saying, wow, I did not know the levels of, like, Hazel Pua's level of Chinese was so powerful as well. So it actually does add shine when people are able to communicate their ideas in an intelligent way in another language.
Well, one thing for sure about this election is we've got some great memes out of them. Yeah. So before we kind of listen into some of those, do you guys have a favorite if you could choose one?
Ooh. I Look Left, Look Right was probably the most popular.
Yeah.
In terms of usefulness to a candidate, I think maybe Michael Teng's Sky is Blue, Not White.
Yeah. I think the Purple Light, the candidate who was who, I mean, he didn't contest in the end, right? Because it was a walkover in Marine Parade. But singing Purple Light was, I think for anyone who has gone through army, that was a moment to remember.
All right, so let's refresh our memory.
I look left, look right, for a career path. Is this a request considered too high?
My name is Han Hui Hui. And what does 3H stand for? First stage, housing. Repeat 3 times. Housing. Housing. Housing.
That's to say, can I say that if police do not have 24-hour service and a thief go into your house and they take all your belongings and you wait for the police come in the morning?
Well, those are some great ones there if you would refresh your memory. So, Daniel, I've seen you kind of, mouth some of those memes along. But with so many viral memes like this, wouldn't you say such memes kind of distorted the seriousness of key policy issues, turning complex discussions into viral jokes and potentially leading voters to, underestimate such parties?
I wouldn't say so. I think not enough credit goes to some of these candidates who provided us entertainment, because I think as much as it's seen as a joke, I think it's extremely important just because not everyone in the electorate is going to be extremely interested in the serious side of things. And to me, my take is that if it's going to be between complete apathy towards politics, or versus someone being somewhat interested in politics because of this, I would much prefer the latter. So I think for us, when we were doing the live streams, and Terence was on one of them, we actually saw this duality of the electorate very, very clearly. Whenever we were diving into very, very serious policy talk, there were people in the chats that were saying, hey, I thought your podcast quite chill and quite casual. How come so serious? And then we immediately skewed it towards something that was more casual. And then people were saying, what happened to all the serious talk? We were just enjoying that. So I think it's very much quite representative of the population, right? I think there are those who are going to be politically enthused, and there's going to be those who are going to be slightly more attracted to this entertainment side of things. And I think both are quite important because 9 days can be short, but it can feel very long as well.
But the PAP has also received their fair share of memeable moments, such as David New's famous,
I go to bed, and every morning when I wake up, the sun rises. But I never make the mistake of thinking that the sun rises because I woke up.
And of course, the most viral moment with Gan Kim Yong.
There are still good people in my team, like Gan Kim Yong. He's the task force man. Wear it with a badge of honor. You are Singapore's task force man.
Gan Kim Yong.
All right. Well, Terence, I want to bring you into the conversation here as well with these memes. Did PAP leverage social media better, especially with memes, taking the, task force man meme into their own hands, unlike the opposition that ultimately pushed them to victory?
I believe so. I think they did a good job. Because if you think back to GE2020, what do we remember from it? We remember the memes. That's all. Cheng He Ti Tong or whatever. So it was very important that the PAP really leaned into a lot of these memes that were created. I mean, don't discount the Task Force Man meme. It was literally pushed by our own Prime Minister, right? He pushed that meme out. And I think David New also took charge of the meme himself and, he embraced it fully. So I think there was a real concerted effort to not shy away from these things and understanding that come GE 2030, these are the memes that people are going to remember. They're not going to remember the vote share. They're not going to remember how many seats you won. They're going to remember the memes.
Right. On Facebook, we've got another comment from a listener from RH who is asking, what's your one shook thing from the elections?
Oh, the one shook thing. Yeah, because that's a segment from our podcast where every episode we talk about something shook that comes up. I think the one shook thing for me was because we were on the ground doing our podcast, the one shook thing was really being able to be on the ground and just even shadowing politicians as they were doing their walks on the ground and really experiencing the sun, the crowds and all the elements of what walking the ground feels like. And so we had our fans of our podcast coming up and saying hi. So we were shaking hands. At a certain point, it felt strange because we were also shaking hands alongside, Pritam Singh shaking hands with his followers and all. So in that sense, I got a glimpse of what it's like to run in an election.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know that the One Shock thing is part of Yalabat's podcast, but what about you, Daniel? What do you think?
I think for us was being able to speak to a whole myriad of candidates from both, like, I guess, quote unquote, like the more serious parties, but also like across all the different parties as well. So I think we spoke to candidates from PAR, from NSP, and I think they don't get as much coverage, or sometimes the coverage may be different from who they are, and to be able to see them and speak to them in a completely different light and maybe almost change our impression slightly was quite an interesting thing for us to kind of go through.
Yeah, and there were even like actual announcements that candidates made on their live streams.
Yeah.
Like SDA changing their party colours halfway through the elections. That was announced on their live stream as well.
Yeah, so we were completely caught off guard. We were completely surprised by that. We didn't even know how to react because we didn't think that they were being serious, but that was super fun for us.
Some great moments there, but it looks like people tuning in. We've got fans of both of your podcasts. Dan says he enjoys the Daily Catch-Up and Yalabat during GE for giving fresh perspectives. So I guess thank you. And looks like, Money FM did some content as well. So give us some love as well. But speaking of content here, at the end of the day, how much content is too much content? Terrence, you want to go off with this?
I think we also got to think about social media not as a monolith, right? Like how people consume YouTube is different from how they consume TikTok. Even for me at my age, like I use a lot of YouTube, but I use YouTube almost as a search engine to kind of look for, research more about things I want to see. Whereas when I'm on TikTok or Instagram Reels, it's sort of just feeding me with whatever everyone else is watching, right? So when they say too much content, I don't think there can be too much content. It's just a matter of like, is it being force-fed to you through an algorithm, or are you sort of intelligently searching for it yourself and educating yourself more?
All right. Well, Daniel, what about you? How much content is too much content?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think at the end of the day, I think as a content creator to content creator, how maybe there may be too much content, but at the end of the day, the audience will decide. So if you see a dip in views, for example, or if there's suddenly a change in sentiment, people maybe at first will appreciate the content and suddenly feel like, oh, you're really digging the bottom of the barrel, they'll let you know. So I think at the end of the day, the feedback loop these days, because of the comment section and just the way social media is, content creators will know.
Well, we've got some great perspectives from both of you today. Now, just to, wrap up our conversation, given the massive online traction some candidates gained, from viral songs to influencer endorsements, did social media create a realistic picture of political change, or did it inflate hopes that the ballot box ultimately couldn't fulfill? Terrence, you want to go off?
I think to Dan's point earlier, we all live in our own echo chambers. I think that's something we've all learned. So if you ask someone who's very much, pro-incumbent, they're going to say, this is what I see everyone else saying, and it's all pro-incumbent, right? Whereas if you ask someone who's hanging out on Reddit and or Singapore Raw, one of these subreddits, they'll say differently. And just understanding that, the idea of your expectations are different, then you get a sense of, okay, like, we don't think about, there's no such thing as an average Singapore voter, right? Everyone kind of has the differences. And even for us, going on the ground and just understanding the challenges on the ground for candidates. For example, like in West Coast, when you want to go from one coffee shop to another, you probably have to hop into a vehicle, drive over to the next coffee shop, and then get off and then talk to people. Whereas if you do it in Siglap, you probably can, put on a pair of shoes and just walk across the whole Siglap, right? So it's a very different landscape when you talk about different parts of the island. So I think understanding that, Singaporeans are now a much more discerning group of voters, and you can't just all label them as one type of average voter. That allows you to see the results in a bit more nuanced context.
All right. Well, Daniel, what about you? Did social media, overrepresent the views of politically active youth voters, skewing public perception of what the majority wanted?
I feel that there may be a slight incongruence between what was being said on social media and what ended up being, the results of the election, simply because I think what we've seen, and Terrence touched on this, with like WP kind of consolidating quite a lot of, like, they did better in terms of vote share than they did before, but PAP did better as well against all other opposition other than WP. And what this kind of signals to is that maybe Singaporeans are looking for some change, but only if it's more credible opposition such as WP. And so we see high numbers of maybe views and interactions on WP content, for example, or maybe even higher turnouts at rallies. It doesn't necessarily translate to votes because WP isn't contesting in every single GRC or SMC. Even when I went for a WP rally this year and bumped into acquaintances, some of them were just there because they were swing voters and they wanted to find out more. Others were WP fans, but they weren't, they don't live in a ward that WP is contesting in. So I think there is going to be some mismatch in terms of what the sentiment is and what the election results are going to be. And I think it's more about looking at it as a trend across different elections that will really tell us the story.
Right. Well, some great insights from you both. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Terence Chia, who is the co-host of Yalla But podcast, and Daniel Lim, co-host of the Daily Catch-Up podcast. This has been The Hot Seat, where it's not just about winning an argument, but about understanding the complex layers that underpin today's hottest topics. Thank you to those who tuned in live on our social media platforms as well. But tune in next week again for another Hot Seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jung.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.